The rules around what you store at home are quietly shifting, and most people in the preparedness world have no idea it's happening. Not in some dramatic, overnight way, slowly, incrementally, through fire codes, state legislatures, federal statutes, pharmacy regulations, and insurance fine print. The environment for everyday people who keep supplies at home is getting more complicated, and almost nobody is covering the specifics. That's what this video is about. Let me be clear up front about what you're about to watch. This is not a video about government raids on your pantry. That framing doesn't make anyone more prepared, and it's never been how this channel operates. What this is about is a real and growing patchwork of laws, federal, state, and local, that collectively shape what you can legally store, how much of it you can keep, and what happens to all of it when an emergency is declared. Most of these rules exist for completely legitimate reasons: fire safety, public health, making sure scarce resources stay accessible to the people who need them most during a crisis. Understanding those rules isn't about finding loopholes, it's about building your preparedness system on ground that actually holds. Because here's something that doesn't get said enough. The worst outcome isn't being unprepared. It's spending years building a supply system, investing real money and real time, only to find out that part of it was technically illegal the entire time, or that the rules changed while you weren't watching. If you've been paying attention to the world over the last few years, you know why this conversation matters now more than ever. Supply chains buckled in ways nobody predicted, and they took longer to recover than almost anyone expected. Energy grids went down across entire continents. Winter storms knocked out power to regions for days, sometimes weeks. The Iberian Peninsula blackout reminded the world that even modern, well-maintained electrical infrastructure can fail completely in seconds. These aren't hypothetical scenarios pulled from a prepper forum. They're recent history. And every time one of those events unfolds, legislatures and regulatory agencies take notice, and they act. So do the conversations about what's appropriate to store at home, what's appropriate to sell, and what crosses the line into something governments feel they need to regulate. That's the backdrop. That's why the regulatory environment is shifting. Now, some of what I'm going to cover today may feel familiar if you've been here a while. We've touched on pieces of this across different videos over the years. But I've come to believe that in the preparedness space, reminding people matters as much as teaching them new things. Details blur over time, regulations update, and the specific numbers, the actual legal thresholds, are the things that fade fastest. So even if parts of this feel like review, stay with it. The specifics matter more than the general idea. One more thing before we get into it. Nothing I say here is legal advice. I'm not an attorney. Laws vary at the state level, at the county level, sometimes at the city level. What I'm covering is a general overview based on federal law, widespread state trends, and the types of regulations that affect the largest number of people. Your job, and mine, is to treat this as a starting point, then verify what actually applies in your specific location. A 15-minute phone call to your local fire department or a quick search of your state's current statutes can answer most of these questions. That small investment of time protects a much larger investment of effort. 7 categories. Let's go through them. We're starting with the one that catches more people off guard than almost anything else in this space: fuel storage at home. Gasoline, diesel, kerosene, propane. Most people who take preparedness seriously keep some fuel around. A 5-gallon can in the garage for the generator, maybe another for the lawnmower or the truck. A couple of propane tanks for the grill or a camp stove. That's a sensible, normal setup, and nobody's going to come knocking about it. But there are hard legal numbers behind all of this that most people have never actually looked up. And those numbers don't come from the federal government. They come from your local fire code, which in the vast majority of residential jurisdictions across the country is based on standards set by the National Fire Protection Association, specifically a document called NFPA 30. Under those standards, the maximum amount of flammable liquid you can store at a residential property, and that includes gasoline and Coleman-type white gas, is 25 gallons total. Not per container, not per room, not per structure. 25 gallons total across your entire property.
Of that, no more than 10 gallons can be located in an attached garage.
0 gallons can be stored in a basement or any occupied living space. Containers must be properly rated and specifically approved for flammable liquid storage. Here's the detail that catches people every single time. Empty containers count the same as full ones when a fire marshal calculates your total. That mostly empty 5-gallon can gathering dust in the corner of your garage still counts as 5 gallons toward your legal limit. Combustible liquids, diesel and kerosene, operate under slightly different rules because their flash points are higher. They don't produce the same explosive vapor as gasoline at room temperature, but they're still regulated. Standard guidance for residential diesel storage is typically around 25 gallons in portable, approved containers, ideally stored in a detached structure. For larger quantities, requirements are tightening. Several counties in Texas now require impermeable containment basins for above-ground diesel tanks over 1,000 gallons. Any spill of 25 gallons or more triggers a mandatory reporting requirement to the state environmental agency. Propane sits in its own regulatory category. Most fire codes allow roughly 25 gallons of propane in portable DOT-rated cylinders at a residence, which works out to approximately 5 standard 20-pound grill tanks. Where natural gas service is available, fire codes may limit permanent propane installations to 500 gallons or less. None of this is advisory. These are enforceable codes. Your fire department has the legal authority to inspect and cite you. Are they going door to door looking for gas cans? No. But if there's ever a garage fire, a neighbor complaint, a routine inspection for a home sale, or an insurance claim review, your fuel storage gets measured against code. People have been fined. People have been ordered to remove stored fuel from their property. The practical response is simple. Find out your specific local limits. Call your fire department. They'll tell you without judgment. Use only approved containers. If you genuinely need more fuel capacity than your property allows, a detached shed built to code often comes with more generous allowances than attached structures. You can absolutely prep with fuel. You just need to know exactly where the line is. And there's one more fuel issue worth flagging that rarely comes up. During a declared state of emergency, many states activate additional restrictions at the retail level. You've seen this play out during major hurricanes, gas stations limiting purchases to 10 or 15 gallons per vehicle. Some states have statutes that give governors the power to impose purchase limits, rationing protocols, or mandatory price controls on fuel during emergency declarations. Those rules kick in fast. The people who already have what they need don't have to stand in those lines. That's the entire point. Now let's talk about water storage. Most people underestimate the regulatory dimension here because water seems straightforward, but the legal landscape around water is more complicated than it looks, and it varies more by location than almost any other category we'll cover. Rainwater collection is the most obvious example. In some states, collecting rainwater from your own roof is completely unrestricted. In others, it's heavily regulated, and in a small number of jurisdictions, it has historically been illegal without a permit. The reasoning behind those restrictions is tied to water rights law, a legal framework that's particularly robust in Western states, where water scarcity is a genuine resource management issue. The good news is that the national trend is moving toward expanded allowance for residential rainwater collection. Many Western states have updated their laws in recent years to allow limited collection without permits, typically in the range of 50 to 100 gallons in covered, sealed containers. But the word limited is doing real work in that sentence. If you're planning to use rainwater collection as a meaningful component of your water supply strategy, verify current state law because it changes. And 100 gallons sounds like a lot until you're 2 weeks into an extended grid-down scenario. For stored water indoors, the regulatory concerns shift towards structural load limits. Fresh water weighs approximately 8 1/3 pounds per gallon. A standard 55-gallon drum holds roughly 460 pounds of water once filled. 2 of them together exceed 900 pounds. Most residential floors, especially upper floors, are not engineered for that kind of concentrated point load. Before you fill large containers inside your home, know what your floor structure can actually support.
This is an engineering question, not a regulatory one, but getting it wrong has serious consequences. What about well water?
If you're on a private well, your water is regulated by a mix of federal standards and state drinking water regulations. Many states require periodic testing, and some require permits for new wells or significant modifications to existing ones. Understanding your rights and your obligations around your water source is fundamental to a sound water strategy. Here's the broader point on water. The category most people treat as simple is actually one of the most geographically variable in terms of legal requirements. Verify what applies where you live before you build your system. The third category is food storage, specifically the legal framework around accumulation during declared emergencies. Under normal conditions, storing food at home is entirely legal. There's no federal statute limiting how many pounds of rice a household can own. No law against having a year's worth of canned goods on your shelves. That is not in dispute, and anyone telling you otherwise is wrong. But there is a layer of law that becomes relevant during declared emergencies. Several states have statutes on the books, some actively enforced, some largely dormant, that give governors or state emergency management agencies authority to commandeer or redirect privately held supplies in extreme scarcity situations. These statutes are generally tied to imminent public health threats and are rarely invoked, but they exist. Knowing they exist changes nothing about how you should prep. It does mean that understanding the legal environment matters even for the most basic category. The more practical legal issue around food storage is one most people haven't considered at all: food safety codes and commercial food preparation regulations. If you're producing, preserving, or distributing any food commercially, even from your home, you enter a completely different regulatory space. Small batch preserving for personal or household use is generally unrestricted. The moment you begin selling, trading, or distributing food you've preserved or processed, cottage food laws come into play. Every state has them, and they vary enormously. Some states are highly permissive, others require licensing, labeling, and facility inspections even for small-scale cottage food operations. If that's part of your resilience strategy, the ability to trade or barter preserved goods, it's worth knowing the rules in your state before an emergency makes the question urgent. The fourth category is firearms and ammunition storage, and before anyone in the comments says this doesn't apply to them, hear this out, because the legal dimension here is broader than most people realize, even among those who own firearms. Federal law governs who can own firearms and what types are legal at the national level, but storage requirements are primarily a state and local matter, and they are changing. A growing number of states have enacted or proposed safe storage mandates that require firearms to be stored in locked containers or with trigger locks when not in active use. California, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, Colorado, Oregon, and several others have enacted versions of these requirements. Some of these statutes carry criminal penalties, not for owning firearms, for the storage method. That's a meaningful distinction. You can be in compliance with every federal rule and still face legal exposure at the state level for how your firearms are kept. If you live in a state with active safe storage requirements, know exactly what they mandate. Locked up somewhere may not meet the specific threshold in your state statute. On ammunition, there's no federal limit on how much ammunition a law-abiding civilian can store, but certain states have moved to regulate it. California now requires background checks for ammunition purchases. Several states have proposed quantity limits on certain calibers. These proposals haven't all passed, but the trend is worth watching because the direction of travel is clear. There's also the insurance dimension. Many homeowners' insurance policies have specific language around firearms and ammunition storage. Storing ammunition improperly or in quantities that exceed what your policy defines as reasonable can affect coverage in the event of theft, fire, or damage. Review your policy. Ask your insurer specific questions. This is an area where a 5-minute conversation with your insurance agent can prevent a significant financial problem. And if you're in an HOA, a homeowners association, there may be a separate layer of restrictions around what you can store in a garage or a shed that go beyond both state law and your insurance policy. HOA enforcement is civil rather than criminal, but the consequences are real.
The fifth category is prescription medications, and this is the one that carries the highest stakes for anyone with a chronic health condition.
The core issue is a straightforward conflict between the medical system's design philosophy and the principles of preparedness. Our entire pharmaceutical supply chain is built around just-in-time delivery. Medications are manufactured, distributed, and dispensed in quantities calibrated to immediate need, not to emergency reserves. Most insurance plans will not authorize refills until you've used between 75 and 80% of your current supply. That's a deliberate throttle on accumulation. What this means in practice: building even a 30-day emergency buffer of a critical prescription medication is harder than most people expect. It requires working with your healthcare system, not around it. The legal framework here is layered. Federal law, specifically the Controlled Substances Act, places hard limits on how certain medications can be prescribed, dispensed, and stored. Schedule II controlled substances, including many ADHD medications and certain pain medications, have the most stringent restrictions. Prescriptions can only be written for a 30-day supply in most states. Early refills are generally not permitted except under specific circumstances. Storing large quantities, even of your own legitimately prescribed medication, can raise legal flags if quantities appear inconsistent with personal use. For non-controlled medications, the restrictions are looser but still real. Insurance coverage limits create practical barriers even when legal ones are absent. Many plans only allow a 90-day supply per fill, and quantity limit exceptions, while possible to request, require documentation and often face automatic rejection on first submission. The practical strategy is to work proactively with your doctor. Have a direct, explicit conversation about your concern regarding pharmacy access during a prolonged emergency. Most physicians have witnessed enough supply chain disruptions and natural disasters in recent years to take the request seriously. Some will write an additional prescription specifically designated as an emergency supply. Others will adjust refill timing to help you naturally accumulate a small buffer. But you have to ask, the default system is not designed to support this. Use medication synchronization programs at your pharmacy. If your insurance auto-rejects a 90-day fill, submit a quantity limit exception. Those rejections are often automated defaults that can be reversed on appeal. If you depend on daily medication, this is the most critical part of your entire preparedness plan. You can improvise food solutions, you can filter water, you cannot improvise insulin, you cannot improvise blood pressure medication. The people who think this through in advance are the ones who remain resilient when systems under pressure. The sixth category affects a specific but fast-growing segment of the preparedness community: hemp-derived products containing THC. For several years following the 2018 Farm Bill, a regulatory gap allowed hemp-derived cannabinoid products with meaningful THC content to be sold legally as long as the delta-9 THC concentration was below 0.3% by dry weight. This created an enormous, largely unregulated market. Gummies, tinctures, vapes, and edibles sold openly at gas stations, convenience stores, and online. Many were functionally intoxicating. Most were technically legal. That window is closing. Congress addressed the gap through a provision in a broader appropriations bill. The new federal definition measures total THC rather than only delta-9 and caps consumer products at 0.44 milligrams of total THC per container. For context, many products currently on shelves contain 50 to several hundred milligrams per package. The new threshold makes essentially all of them non-compliant. Products that are legal today will be federally prohibited before the year ends. If you've incorporated any hemp-derived THC products into your preparedness planning for pain management, sleep support, or anxiety during high-stress scenarios, the legal foundation beneath those products is dissolving on a defined timeline. This isn't a distant or speculative change. Many manufacturers are already reformulating or pivoting their product lines in anticipation of the deadline. Understand what's coming before it arrives. The seventh and final category is the most important one on this list, not because it applies to a single product, but because it describes a legal mechanism capable of turning anything on your shelf into a restricted item overnight.
Under the Defense Production Act, Title 50, Section 45-12, the President of the United States can designate specific materials as scarce and make it a federal offense to accumulate them beyond what the statute describes as the reasonable demands of business, personal, or home consumption. Read that phrase again.
Reasonable demands. Those words are deliberately undefined. There's no chart, no number, no threshold you can look up in advance. What counts as reasonable is determined by enforcement agencies interpreting a presidential designation after an emergency has already been declared. This isn't theoretical, it happened. In March of 2020, the Secretary of Health and Human Services designated N95 masks, ventilators, gloves, gowns, hand sanitizers, and other personal protective equipment under this provision. The Department of Justice formed a dedicated task force. The FBI launched investigations. Criminal charges were filed. A businessman in Mississippi was indicted for stockpiling PPE and soliciting healthcare facilities at inflated prices. Over 500,000 N95 masks were seized from another company and redistributed to hospitals in New York and New Jersey. And it didn't stop at large-scale commercial actors. Regular people who had accumulated what they personally considered reasonable supplies of hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, and masks faced scrutiny when neighbors reported them or when they attempted to resell even small quantities online. The challenge is this. The line between prepared and hoarding becomes deeply subjective the moment an emergency is declared and emotions are running high in every direction. What feels like basic common sense to you may look completely different to a neighbor who didn't prepare at all, especially if that neighbor is scared and looking for someone to blame. Which is precisely why how you build your supplies matters as much as what you store. Gradual, steady acquisition during ordinary times is essentially invisible. It blends in. It looks like normal household purchasing behavior, because that's exactly what it is. Panic buying during the first week of a declared crisis is the specific behavior these laws are designed to target. Building your supply before the crisis exists is not only smarter from a practical standpoint, it's also your best legal protection. Beyond the federal statute, roughly 35 states have their own anti-price gouging laws that activate automatically during declared emergencies. California limits price increases to 10%. New Jersey holds the same line. Pennsylvania allows up to 20% before enforcement triggers. These laws cover goods, services, fuel, housing, and food. And these laws are getting stronger, not weaker. California recently extended the duration of its emergency price gouging protections from 30 days to 180 days for certain product categories. Florida's statute now carries criminal penalties. Multiple states expanded the scope of their laws during and after the pandemic to capture categories of goods that weren't previously covered. The regulatory infrastructure around emergency accumulation and price gouging is more robust today than it has ever been in American history. The legal distinction between preparedness and hoarding comes down to three things: timing, intention, scale. The household that built gradually, that rotates stock regularly, and that acquired supplies during ordinary times at ordinary prices, that household is prepared. The individual who cleared store shelves the morning after a pandemic was declared and listed supplies online at a significant markup committed a crime. The law targets the second scenario. It has never been aimed at the first. The best prep is the one you built before you needed it. That's not just practical wisdom. Under the legal framework we've been discussing, it's also legal protection. There's a principle I return to often in this space, and it applies directly to everything we've covered today. Preparedness built on solid ground doesn't need to hide. When you know the rules, when your supplies were acquired thoughtfully in normal times, in reasonable quantities through legal channels, you don't have to worry about anyone questioning your readiness. That kind of quiet confidence is what real preparedness actually produces. Not anxiety, not paranoia. Confidence backed by preparation. Let's do a fast recap of all 7 categories before we close out. Fuel storage. 25 gallons of flammable liquid is the standard residential limit in most jurisdictions under NFPA 30. That includes empty containers. Detached structures often allow more. Know your local code specifically. Water collection.
Rainwater laws vary dramatically by state and are actively changing. Structural load matters for large indoor water storage. Well rights and obligations differ by state. Verify current law in your location. Food storage. Legally unrestricted under normal conditions. State emergency statutes exist but are rarely invoked. Cottage food laws govern preservation and distribution at any commercial scale. Know them if barter or trade is part of your plan. Firearms and ammunition.
Storage mandates are expanding at the state level and carry real criminal penalties in several states. Insurance policy language matters. HOA restrictions may apply on top of state law. Review all three. Prescription medications. The medical system is not designed to support emergency buffers. Work directly with your doctor. Request exception approvals for extended supplies. Medication synchronization helps. If you depend on daily medication, this is your highest priority planning item. Hemp-derived THC products. The federal legal window is closing on a defined timeline. Products legal today face a hard deadline. Plan accordingly now rather than scrambling later. The Defense Production Act. The most important mechanism on this list because it has no fixed threshold. It can reach any category of goods during any federally declared emergency. Timing and method of acquisition are your best protection. Build before the crisis, not during it. Here's the practical framework that ties all of this together. Know the specific rules in your jurisdiction. Don't assume you know them. Verify them. Call your fire department. Search your state's current statutes. Ask your doctor directly. Review your insurance policy language. A small investment of time in each of these areas removes significant legal and financial risk from your entire preparedness setup. Build gradually and consistently during ordinary times. This isn't just advice about budget management or avoiding stress. It's a legal strategy. Gradual acquisition during normal conditions is not what emergency hoarding laws are designed to address. It's not what price gouging enforcement targets. It is, by legal definition and practical precedent, the behavior of a prepared household. Document your acquisition process if you're building a substantial supply. Receipts, purchase history, records of what you have and when you acquired it. This isn't paranoia, it's simply removing ambiguity if questions ever arise. And stay current. The regulatory environment we've covered today is not static. Laws are being updated at the state level on a rolling basis. Federal designations can change without warning. This channel will continue covering these developments as they emerge so that you have accurate, current information to work with. If you found this useful, do me a favor and hit the like button. It genuinely helps this content reach more people who need it. And if this is your first time here, welcome to my channel. We cover preparedness from a practical, legally informed, and evidence-based perspective. This is the kind of content we produce every week, and it only gets better. Leave a comment below and tell me which of the 7 categories surprised you most, or if you know of a specific legal detail in your state that you think the rest of the community should be aware of, share it. The collective knowledge in this comment section regularly exceeds what any single video can cover because you all live in different states with different rules and different experiences. The laws will keep changing, they always do. But preparedness built the right way, legally, practically, thoughtfully, doesn't expire. It doesn't become a liability. It becomes exactly what you intended it to be, a foundation that holds when everything else around it is under pressure. Preparedness is not about having the most. It's about having the right things in reasonable amounts, acquired at the right time, maintained the right way. That approach holds up in a crisis. That approach holds up under scrutiny. That approach holds up over years. Build it that way. Take care of yourselves.